Hello, I'm Mike Talks. I'm a Wellington-based tester, Wellington, New Zealand, and you might know me as Test Sheep New Zealand or even from the book How to Test, which was an introduction on testing that I put together a few years ago. Now today, I'm quite ambitiously going to try and talk through a thought experiment on integration testing with you in just 8 minutes. Are you ready? Let's start the clocks. Right, well, a quick history lesson in coding. So in the 90s, when I was a developer, it seemed like every system that we built, we pretty much built all the code from the ground up. Now, some of that was great in the fact that we had complete ownership of everything, but it also meant that we reinvented the wheel, like this poor child here, a few times. And sometimes there were certain areas where we were not subject matter experts, and although we did our best, we could have done better. Now, since the 2000s, most of the systems I've worked on have been more of a COTS world or commercial off-the-shelf products. They're commercially available solutions which, in theory, have been pre-tested, and they just operate as a box that you connect to and through an interface, usually an API. So, in theory, it makes things a lot easier to build, but as I said, the whole focus of this thought experiment is thinking about what we need to test when we're talking integration tests. So let's take a solution here in the middle. We're going to create a brand new video streaming service. It seems that the world can't get enough of video streaming services, so we're going to make a new one. Well, here's some products that we might want. Well, we might want somewhere to store all our videos, some kind of cloud service, maybe Amazon, maybe Azure, and to connect up to. And there's all our video services stored there, ready to go. And we probably want to get paid as well. So we probably want our system to have a payment gateway, and handling payments is quite complex business. So of course we want a component that's pre-existing so that we don't have to meet the latest standards and deal with everything. So yeah, we'll get a payment gateway system as well. And well, a lot of people do like watching stuff on the phone, but a lot of people prefer to cast it on a nearby television. So why wouldn't we want to use a Chromecast system and rather than build one ourselves because we're not video experts? Um, so here we go. We've putting together a system. There's three components we've identified from the off that would be useful to help us to get to where we need to go. Now, the misconception from non-testers can be that, well, there's three-quarters of our systems already built, so we don't need to do that much testing. And while it's true that each of these components should be unit tested as its own thing, your system comprising all these four parts hasn't been tested in this configuration, and there's a lot to go wrong with the interaction between these components. But on the other hand, the problem for us as testers, we can have issues targeting what we're supposed to test. If we raise a defect on the system where the problem we find is wholly a problem on a COTS product, so for instance, wholly an issue with our payment system, we can get a bit of a backlash that, hey, you're supposed to be testing our product, not the COTS component. Now, I moved to an integration testing role in 2008 on a product where I used to do the component testing. And when I reviewed a lot of our test suite for the integration suite, I found a lot of tests that were solely testing one single component and were covered elsewhere and weren't really integration issues. I had to develop a bit of a rule of thumb for weeding these out. Okay, so my simple rule is this. I've got our system here, our little app, and the Chromecast. And to be an integration test, I need to be moving between these. So I need to be starting at my app, calling the Chromecast, or the Chromecast needs to be calling me. Otherwise, I'm just testing one component. So if you have a test idea that's just stuck doing something on one component, then of course, obviously, it's a component test. It's not an integration test. So let's think of a good idea, a happy day test for an integration test. And that's simply, I am on my device and it sends through to the Chromecast, and the Chromecast says, yes, I'm playing on it. Easy. That's easy peasy. An idea of a test that's not such a great integration test. So I have a test where a video is already playing on the Chromecast, and maybe I switched the Wi-Fi on and off, yeah, and it interrupts the signal. And if my test is solely on what happens on the Chromecast, then congratulations, I'm testing the Chromecast, not my system. If I'm saying I interrupt what's going on the Chromecast, should I be sending a message? Should the Chromecast be sending a message back to my system that will generate a pop-up that says, "Hey, your service was interrupted"? Then that does become an integration test. So there's good news anyway. When you're dealing with a commercial off-the-shelf product, there will always be an interface spec of some sort, talking about all the interactions that can go between the component that you're using and your system. And that can be a great source of ideas for tests. Here's something you might want to do for payment gateway tests, for instance. So there's different codes that can be returned. So 00 means successful. And there's a whole heap of different unsuccessful rules. So 08, honor with identification, do not honor, error, invalid amount, invalid transaction. And here's a similar table for the Google Chromecast, including a whole series of scenarios where there should be an error thrown. So examples of, for instance, some media unknown, media aborted. Quite an interesting one to me, source buffer failure, the buffer has failed. Now, all those items are worth covering to see that when the Chromecast sends that message to your system, how your system responds to make sure it responds correctly. But traditionally, as testers, we'll look at a problem like the buffering issue or the media not supported, and our mindset tends to be very much on what do we do to the cloud-based system to trigger that error in the Chromecast to send it to our system. And sometimes with integration testing, very much like we're saying, let's focus on what are we actually testing. We shouldn't be testing the Chromecast. We're testing our system's response to the message that the Chromecast sends. So be wary of using your system to test a component that's already out there and is benchmarked and tested. For a scenario like that, what you might want to do instead is build a stub that uses the interface spec and follows all the rules of the interface spec, but for which you can generate errors like the buffer error or the media not supported. It's an easier way to test the responses of your application than creating very elaborate scenarios, which are usually very time consuming. And if your system is created pretty well, they should be quite tricky to do anyway. Because what you're actually trying to do, you're trying to check how your system responds when that error message is sent through to it. You don't actually have to construct that whole scenario. This is an ideal situation to use a stub to substitute. For a happy day situation, it would be ludicrous to use a stub when a Chromecast is so easily available. But like I say, if you go through some of the table of errors, each of those errors is an ideal idea for a test scenario, but you want an easy way to basically send those error messages to your system